Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with New Zealand-based alto saxophonist and composer Jake Baxendale. He talked about his newest 2021 CD, Sanctuary, teamed up with saxophonist and composer Jasmine Lovell-Smith. The CD features original music played by an 11-piece ensemble. He is based in Wellington, New Zealand. He celebrates his life and music in a freedom of expression, a love of nature, and a community-oriented mindset that is heavily influenced by this environment. His story is a great one. Enjoy. Hey, thanks for taking a minute out for the show. I appreciate it.
Hey, my pleasure.
So you have teamed up with Jasmine for a brand new album that's on kind of the heels of this pandemic we've all lived through. And I kind of want to know about the timing, one of the few ways that you can directly communicate with the audience. How does it feel to have this album out now?
Oh, man, it's so fantastic. Yeah. For me, I mean, we're really lucky here because, you know, we're playing gigs and stuff now. We have been doing so for a while. We're pretty safe. But when we were locked down and we couldn't play music, I was gutted because I realized my whole motivation for playing music was to be around people and be doing it socially, you know, so that was pretty tough. So it's great to be able to do something like this, especially a large ensemble album like this with so many players involved, to get together and record it, put it out, and do a gig of it was really special.
Yeah, anytime you can do something like that, whether there's a pandemic or not, it's a pretty big achievement right there. So, well, I'm curious is, you know, you look around the world and other places were hit in various ways, but it seemed like New Zealand was relatively safe. What did you all do that kept yourself insulated and safe during what pretty much ravaged the United States and different parts of the world?
I think there are a lot of factors in our favor. Hey, we're a very small island, relatively speaking, very far to the South Pacific, you know, so we have the natural border of, you know, the ocean. So I guess in March, we closed our borders. Last year, we closed our borders, and they're still mostly closed. You can come to New Zealand if you're from some of the Pacific Islands or Australia, or if you're a New Zealand resident or citizen, and that's it. And so the government's been very, very strict with all of the measures they put in place. And I think we were just pretty lucky to have the kinds of advice that the government was getting, like the chief science advisor and our guy Ashley Bloomfield, who was the main dude providing advice on the pandemic at the time. Just saw elimination strategy as being the most viable option, and it worked for the most part.
Yeah, and I guess the bottom line is I assumed it was really about leadership, and unfortunately America had a lunatic running things for a while, so that didn't really help things for us at all. So
we were very lucky.
Yeah. Well, we are now. Things have really kind of done a quite a big U-turn here, so it's been good. But how did you get involved with jazz? How did the seeds of jazz begin for you?
Well, I grew up in a very rural part of New Zealand myself, so it really happened like there was no jazz in the place where I grew up. I was surrounded by music. My dad was a drummer. I got playing the saxophone when I was 10, and so I was just drawn to the kind of more improvised music over time. And I did have a piano teacher who really loved jazz. He was mostly self-taught, and he'd sort of taught himself jazz. So it was mostly by jamming to records and improvising in ska bands and soul bands and rock bands and things that led me sort of naturally, when I decided that I wanted to get it together a little bit better. I started listening to more jazz artists and trying to learn that stuff, and realizing there was such a world and there was so much to learn that I needed to go and study if I wanted to, really figure out about this music. So I moved to the capital city where I live now, which is Wellington, and signed up for the university course here. And I didn't actually get in at first, but luckily I failed the audition. But luckily, at the time, they had this sort of preparatory course, an 18-week pre-degree sort of boot camp called the Foundation Certificate in Jazz at the New Zealand School of Music. And so I was offered a place there, and I took it up, and that's where I first met Jasmine. She was my saxophone teacher at the time.
What musicians were you listening to that really influenced you in the beginning?
I remember I was given a few albums by a friend of mine who'd just done the Foundation Certificate ahead of me, and he was from Golden Bay as well, where I grew up. He'd thrown me a few albums, and the first day I went to the library and I just got out everything I could that had was from the saxophone section, and I ended up really thrashing John Coltrane with Thelonious Monk, Saxophone Colossus, and the Wayne Shorter album Speak No Evil. In particular, I remember those three were on very high rotation at the time.
If you could get into a time machine and go back and see anybody in the history of jazz, who would you want to go see? Who would you see live?
Man, it's a really tough question, eh? Yeah, that's a tough one. I think I would really like to see Bird play. That would be something for sure, live. There's a lot of stories as well about those Coltrane concerts when he was getting into that real transcendental phase. Those would be fantastic to see as well. So, yeah, I don't know. There's a lot to choose from. Hey.
Yeah, there is for sure. So, what do you like? What's the best thing about being a professional musician?
It's just being able to play music all the time. Yeah, that is your day to day is a real joy, And I think being able to choose who you work with as well is a really nice silver lining too. I'm surrounded by beautiful people because we all play music, and that's a lovely universal spiritual thing, and that's really nice. I think that really trumps working in an office for me.
What have you learned the most from playing with musicians that have had a lot of experience that has helped you with younger musicians? What have they given you that you in turn have given to younger musicians? That
universality that I just spoke of, that music helps you find, where I could talk about a lot of specific musical things about how I got it together, but I think that the really big lessons, the really deep lessons, have been about how we're all connected and the music's all connected, and it's not separated and it's not siloed. It's not about this genre or that genre, or this musician's better than that musician, or whatever it is. Those petty things like competition and status don't matter in this music. And those have been the really good life lessons. And I guess as much as possible, I'm trying to communicate in my music that idea, and I hope that I try and I guess hope that the younger musicians pick that up as well.
Why do you love jazz?
Yeah, that's it. It's that universality. I'm not a religious person, but it can be a very spiritual thing, playing music. And I think improvising as well there's something real fundamental about it, that you're just making something happen in the moment. And that's really fun as well. That's so interesting. And it's not just the doing of it that's interesting, it's the trying to figure it out. It's like this endless puzzle of how to prepare for something that's supposed to be spontaneous. That's just so fascinating.
So when we do return more and more to live music, what do you hope we all realize about this process that we've been away from? What do you hope that we get, maybe appreciation-wise, about what you do as musicians and how this artistry is presented?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we had a really interesting phenomenon when our bars and restaurants and clubs started opening up last year. They didn't fully open up, it was quite limited. You had to be seated and separated and served at your table, and it was all very, very careful. It was a very careful opening up of things. So the musicians who were able to take advantage of that kind of limitations to the hospitality were jazz musicians, because they could prepare music very quickly. And to be honest, like a restaurant or a club full of people seated at tables is probably more of an audience than they'd normally get. So economically, it made sense as well. So there were a lot of jazz gigs happening at that time, more so than a lot of other musics. And I think that the feeling in those rooms at that time, after so long not seeing anything live, people were just so hungry for it. And I hope that people, I guess if I have a hope for anything after all of this, and when it all opens up and we're able to travel more, is that is, we hold on to that feeling of the live experience, of seeing things happen in the moment as being really, really important, because, the internet and the huge amount of entertainment that's available, high quality stuff that we can just find at the click of a button, is, it's very tempting, right? But the live experience, I think, this pandemic has shown that's not replicable, not really. And if we can hang on to the value of that, I think that would be really cool.
So everyone has an idea or a perception of who they think you are, your family, your friends, your fans, but ultimately you live your life. Who do you think you are?
I don't know. That's an interesting question. I guess I'm a lot of things. But they don't, I guess none of them really define me. I guess I'm a musician, but I don't think that that's necessarily who I am. And I'm part of a wonderful family of people, and we came over from England when I was small to New Zealand. So we moved here. So we're immigrants. So I'm a New Zealander, and I'm also not a New Zealander. I'm an immigrant, and I'm a guest of this country in a way, and of the tangata whenua, the indigenous people of New Zealand. Those two things are really interesting, and I'm also, I'm also very connected to where I grew up, and I'm very connected to this funny little city, Wellington, where I live. And I'm very connected to the community of musicians around me, and to my wonderful partner here. So I think about myself as maybe just being like a part of a number of many connections to do with place and this music and the culture around it, and just part of like a really big network. If you zoomed out, that there's so many individuals involved, but it's all linked up. That's what I think.
Beautiful. Jake, thank you for taking a minute out for Neon Jazz today. Good luck with the album and the return to the live stage. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, Joe. It's been wonderful talking to you.
Thanks for listening and tuning into another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in New Zealand, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Jake for his time, music, and story. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino in the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.